we're moving on to cervical cancer screening, and Dr. Murat Gültekin from Turkey is going to give us an overview of the Turkish experience.
Thank you. So, dear friends, I was the ex-director of Cancer Department in Turkish Ministry of Health, and we did a lot of projects, and among them, one of the projects was cervical cancer screening, and we have updated our screening guidelines to primary HPV DNA, and our country was the first to do this in the world, and it will be my pleasure to share with you the initial results after 4 years of the experience. So let me to remind you several scientific information, because you should then understand why we have updated our screening program and why there is a big change in the world. We know that cervical cancer is a cancer that has been almost 100% elucidated. What does it mean? We know the reason, which is almost 100% is HPV, and we have very important prevention strategies. We have the vaccination, we have the different types of screening, and you can combine vaccination or screening or both in anyhow, according to the infrastructure of your country, according to the number of the manpower that you have. So anyhow, where we are, that like the polio disease, yeah, cervical carcinoma is at a point that you can totally eradicate. The only thing is to give hand in hand and to make a policy within the governments. And now it is the time, because including ESGO, several scientific people is working with WHO, which announced that starting in 2020, there will be a new program in the world. So all ladies will be vaccinated with 2 doses when they are age 12, which will be followed by 2 HPV DNA screening when they are age 30, and the second one when they are age 45. And they assume that within the next 4 decades, the cervical carcinoma mortality will be 0. So we are at a very good point. And today I will discuss HPV DNA, but it does not mean that pap smear is very poor, is something that you should all leave. We very well know that it's a very good program in the United Kingdom, in many countries, it works a lot. However, if you look to the real situation in the European Union, there are only 12 countries with such a very nice organized 70% coverage screening program. So even in developed countries, unfortunately, many of them could not succeed with the pap smear program, despite the fact that we are using pap smear more than 50 years. And the situation is worse in the other countries too. And even in these developed countries like UK, they want to change the system because they do vaccination, they do very well screening, but the incidence is still the same. It does not become 0. So there are some limitations of the pap smear, it's definitely. So what are these limitations? First, it has some scientific problems, but these are relevant for these developed countries with good pap smear program. One of them is that it has a very low sensitivity. So 50 to 60%. What does it mean? You go to a village, there is 100 cancer cases, and you can only detect 50 to 60 of them. The second point is that negative predictive value is low. So you cannot reassure a lady that your pap smear is normal and you can come back 5 years or 10 years later. There's a high possibility that your pap smear will miss an existing cancer. A third point is the reproducibility. So the same lady, the same pap smear is normal in one laboratory, maybe low cytologic abnormality in this laboratory, or may have a high-grade cytological abnormality in laboratory C. So it is the reproducibility, and training is a very important problem, and the fate of this lady depends on the experience of the center of the pathologist where they lived. But in many countries like Turkey, in developing world, these are not the problems. We don't discuss these scientific problems. Our problems is organizational. So pap smear is very complex. You have to work a lot. You need dedicated pathologists. You have to train them. You have to make quality management and then see the results in 10 to 20 years. And in developing countries, it's really, really impossible. So what is next is that HPV DNA is coming up. But this is not a new thing that I'm talking about. There is 20 years research behind, more than 200,000 ladies already randomized with a follow-up data of more than 8 years, so 2 rounds. So what these data give us is that, first, HPV DNA is very sensitive, 96%. Now you go to the village and you can detect 96% of 100 cancer cases. The problem was that it has little bit lower specificity. So some ladies should go unnecessarily to colposcopy if we do only HPV. So how we deal with this low specificity and how we avoid this unnecessary colposcopy is that you should start screening in age 30, and you should also find a triage mechanism, either pap smear for the positive cases or methylation or something else. So the message is that HPV DNA can be used alone after age 30, but you should also consider a triage test for the positives, and you should not leave all the positive ladies to colposcopy around. Another finding was the negative predictivity. 4 times more negative predictivity we have with HPV DNA. What does it mean? Now I can reassure the lady that you are HPV negative and you can come back 5 years, 6 years later. And the ladies are very happy. They're not happy every year to give pap smear. But a negative predictive value makes or gives you this opportunity that the cancer risk is very, very low, is around 10 per 10,000 in next 5 years if you're negative. And also HPV DNA, we know that it's very objective. It can be automated and centralized. You don't need so many manpower. It's a machine. You all bring them, and the machine gives you the result. You have the longer screening intervals. You don't need complex quality criteria. And the technology is developing a lot. Even now, the ladies can do HPV test with a simple urine or self-test. So, like a pregnancy test. So you can do your cancer screening in your home even. So it's really, really has many advantages, organizational aspects, especially for our countries. After all these scientific developments, the guidelines has been changed for all resource settings. I think the HPV DNA is now recommended by many societies. So this is the world. The many countries are changing and transforming, and I'm happy that I was the first to do this in my country, in the world. But I want to underline, finally, once again, that you should not do HPV alone, but you should use a triage test too. These are which countries are using what? Usually double pap smear like Belgium and Netherlands, or in some countries they use pap smear followed by repeat HPV. But in the United States and in my country, we do genotyping. What does it mean? We look, you are HPV positive, and if you are age 16 or 18 positive, then we refer you to colposcopy. Now in the second part, I want to give you the initial results of the Turkish program. We had a screening program since 1985, but the population-based coverage was only 2%, nothing more, only 2%. And for many years, it was very stable. And then the reason was that we did not have so many pathologists and they were not dedicated. So if they are working in the east part, and then they usually move to the west part of the country. When they move, then the pap smear program was totally lost. Some cities were very crowded, like Istanbul, which is larger than 18 European countries. And on the other hand, it was some egocentric. Even if a pathologist is dedicated, and when you say you are not doing a good job, you have too much ASCOs, or you have too much infection results, and they just easily say that, okay, I can do this, and you can move to another pathologist. So these are the reasons why we could not achieve a good, successful program. Then we started a new screening program with HPV DNA. This time, we got from the ladies 2 samples. One is HPV, and the second is the conventional cytology from the whole country. For all ladies over age 30, once in each 5 years. So the samples from all the cities do come to a central laboratory in Ankara, and then we give the result in 10 days. First, we look if you are HPV positive or negative. If you are negative, I don't look to the pap smear, because I have a very sufficient negative predictive. I just say, okay, come 5 years later. But if you are positive, then we do the triage. I told you, then we go to genotyping. And we also look to the second histology sample. So for positive ladies, the result is like that. You are HPV positive, 16 positive, 31 negative, 33 positive, like that, and pap smear is normal or ASCOS, and you should go to the nearest colposcopy. So this is what happened in Turkey, that you see the screening numbers were very stable for many years, and after converting to HPV, we have reached up to 1 million, 10 times almost increase in the primary level population-based screening. And then if you look to the initial results of 4.5 million, this is the largest number in the world that you can hear about, that 4.5 million, it's just around 4%. It's very nice, conservative country, and the HPV prevalence is low, which means that the referral to colposcopy will also be lower. And this is the Turkish genotype. Street by street, doctor by doctor, city by city, I know what is the HPV genotype, what is the prevalence, what does it mean. Within the near future, I can do some vaccine policies based on this data. But we have just captured around 14,000 ladies among the 4 million screened cytological abnormalities other than ASCO. So it's very fine. So these are the HPV types of Turkey. I don't think that it's very relevant for you, but in many countries, usually if you look to the population, the HPV other than 16 and 18 is the dominant. But if you look to the populations with cancer, wherever you go, 16, 18, 31, 33 is the dominant ones. So these are the reflex cytology results. The important point here, in the old times, when we used the pap smear, a majority of the cytology were inadequate, inflammation, infection. And many gynecologists were resampling the pap smear, and ladies were unhappy. But this time, inadequate sampling or infection results were very low with the new program. Very nice. And then we are now publishing our initial results. So first, we published the cytopathological results. So what we found is that, first of all, GP did a fantastic job. I have zero data loss in the GP level. But in the secondary and tertiary colposcopy centers, almost half of the referred patients' data is lost, and now we are searching what's happening there. But if you look, the initial results here, that I can pass here, first of all, in such a conservative country, acceptance rate of the ladies is very high. When you invite them to HPV, the acceptance rate is around 35%. Attendance rate is around 85%, which is fantastic, which will be better in the developed world, I'm sure. And if you go to the gynecology practice, it's definitely clear that Turkey needs some more colposcopic trainings, because in a great majority of the ladies that we refer to colposcopy, they do not do colposcopy, but rather they do re-HPV sampling or re-cytological examination. So training in colposcopy, improving colposcopy is now high importance for my country. But anyhow, let's look to the pathology results, which are very striking, because first, acceptance rates and screening rates, including the opportunities, is around 80%, more than 80%, and the colposcopy referral rate is just 1.6%. This is the lowest in the world. Now I go to the village, there's 100 cases of cancer, I can detect 96 of them, and for the 100 ladies, I only refer 1.6 of the ladies to the colposcopy. And the ladies are happy because they are not unnecessarily referred to the gynecologist. And if you look at the three positivity rates, which is again the highest in pap smear program, it's around 5 to 8% in European Union programs. But with HPV, the positivity is 23%. So in each 1/4 of the ladies that I refer, I can define at least CIN2. I don't refer unnecessarily. And this is another addition of Turkish study to the literature, because in United States studies, everybody was focused on 16 and 18, but what we found here, you can see that actually in our country, and in many others too, 31 and 33 is also important. Look to the Turkish data in this box, that the finding of CIN2, CIN3 is really, really very high, almost higher or equal to HPV 16. So you have to be careful about these 31 and 33. This is our message. So just shortly, I want to show this video. This is how the things going on in Turkey. This is a mega laboratory. Actually, it's not mega, it's just 5 rooms. It's located in Ankara. So all the samples do come from the GPs. Currently, we have a capacity of 8,000. If more ladies to come, you just put another patient. You don't need any cytopathologist, so it's manpower independent. So we have a software which is following up all the procedures of this laboratory. It's in our cell phones, in our iPhones. So in case that we have any problem, that it gives alarm. because we are aiming and targeting to give the result in 10 days, nothing more. So all these samples, 8,000, do come to this laboratory every day, and you know, you don't need any manpower. This is the program that I'm talking about. It starts from GP. Now the sample is in cargo. Then the sample came to the laboratory. The sample is in PCR. The sample is in the purple. So you can see each step. If it is green in your cell phone, it's everything okay. But if it is red, then there is a problem. There is a problem, and you have to move to the laboratory. You have to go, what are you doing there, guys? So then it is almost finishing, Charlie, sorry. So these are the samples coming from Turkish ladies. 2 samples, pap smear and HPV DNA, you see. So they are barcoded. We have finished 5 million almost, and neither of one sample is mixed with another. This is also very important, 5 million samples in the same laboratory, and you should not have any chance. So software is important in this sense. So this software alarms you. No. This pap smear does not belong to this lady, and you don't have any chance to mix with a lady with another. And then we start with first, if you are HPV positive or negative, we don't look to the pap smears, and pap smears will wait. And then first we will look to if they are HPV positive or negative. If you are HPV positive, then we are looking to these pap smears. So it's almost finishing, last 1 minute. So this is the removal of the leads. Yeah. These are the preparations. So we did a very big tender. The big 5 HPV companies have entered it, and we have an unbelievable price with a very good German company actually. And all included is outsourced tendering. So we don't pay any staff, we don't pay any kits, we just pay per patient, including the software. It's all included outsourcing PPP model, public-private partnershipness. But this is the systems that we are using. So I just wanted to underline the fact that if you are, this machine gives you, if you are HPV positive or negative, the result is in 10 hours, is available. And then if you are positive, then you are looking for your genotypes. So we have now 8 machines, 10,000. More ladies to come, you just put 1 machine through. So you can see this 5-minute video on YouTube. It is easily found. But what I want to say is that if you're positive, then we also look your results. So, and additionally, I have just finished a cell phone program that you can download free of charge to your cell phones. It's eHPV or HPV Help. And very soon we are together working on a European level smartphone program, which will be ready by next year. Thank you very much, dear friends, for your attention.
Let me introduce the next speaker, a close colleague of mine, Dr. Andreas Kaufmann from the Charité in Berlin, who will give us the global perspective on cervical cancer screening.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Here's some of my potential conflicts of interest. I would like to point out that I have my own IVD in development, and if time permits, we'll talk about it. So I should give the global perspective on HPVs, on screening and cervical cancer prevention. And I would also like to start with the Director General of WHO, who certainly has the broadest global view on cervical cancer prevention. And when he came into office approximately a year ago, he sent out this call of action to use the tools that we have, this is vaccination and screening, to eliminate cervical cancer worldwide. This is also backed by the International Papillomavirus Society, and I'm as a member of the policy statement. We together formulate different statements and publish, and the last one was about the elimination of cervical cancer as a public health problem. We have the tools, and how can we use them to really get where we want to get to where we want to get, to reduce the cancer burden, especially in countries where it's very high. And this world map shows you the standardized age incidence rate. And you can see that the northern hemisphere has a lower incidence rate due to introduced screening programs, while the southern hemisphere is still at a very, very high incidence, which is mainly driven, the death rate, by incidence in the sub-Indian continent and Africa. We are active with my research lab with the Clinic of Gynecology of Charite in several countries. We have studies in Morocco. We have finalized one in Ghana. We are working in Ethiopia and maybe starting soon in Tanzania. And what we do is we look for the adequate technology to introduce screening, because, as Murat also said, one size does not fit all. What we did for the prevention in the northern hemisphere is not easily transferable to the southern hemisphere, because it's so challenging there to do, for example, cytology, set up cytology or pathology labs. So we need different methods. We need to show that what we want to do is feasible in the healthcare system, and we need data to inform stakeholders to transform what we propose in studies into real-life use. This map now shows you, and you cannot talk about the future of cervical cancer screening if you don't look at what vaccination is achieving. This shows you the national programs for HPV vaccination and recommendation, and in blue these are the countries that have active programs for vaccination of young girls. In green there are demonstration programs, and there are some demos also stopped, unfortunately, in India. What you can see is that the high-income and upper-middle-income countries, half of them approximately have programs initiated and distribute vaccines, mostly in school-based programs. The low-income and the low-middle-income countries, only 14% have vaccination programs introduced. So this is the gap that we need to close. And it's very nice to know that in Morocco and Ethiopia, very recently vaccination programs started that are school-based. That's a consequence that we face. This is a population graph of the developed and less developed world. And in red, you see these girls that are targeted for HPV vaccination in programs. In yellow, those that have really received vaccine. That's about 50% in the developed world. But these 5% here in the less developed world is not very satisfying to reach women with the HPV vaccination. And the consequence is that as these girls, non-vaccinated, non-protected, grow older, they are at risk for developing cervical cancer. And this is a big wave of disease that is coming up onto us in the next 20, 30 years that we will have to deal with screening certainly, but we could have prevented much of this disease. And that this works shows our experience in the Western world. Here as an example, Scotland. Scotland has introduced a very successful school-based program, very constantly reaching 90% of vaccination rate in the schools in young girls over the last 10 years. What the consequence is, you see, if these girls then enter at the age of 20, the national screening program. Scotland has also that, very well organized, and what they do is HPV testing. What you can see with the entering of these vaccinated cohorts in the screening program, the vaccine types, HPV 16 and 18, drop a lot, drop down to nearly only 5% positivity. Also the cross-protective types drop. The non-cross-protective types do not drop at all. What is the consequence of that? No hen, no egg. There is also a big success in preventing premalignant disease. By approximately 90%, CN2 and CN3 is prevented and is dropping down to very low rates. So what this means is, in such a situation, in such cohorts, screening has to change. It does not make sense to screen like we do it in Germany right now, every year, every woman for 30, 40 years with cytology screening. We need other means, and what we also will introduce is HPV screening, just as you heard by Murat. Another example is Australia. A very successful school-based program was introduced in 2007 with more than 80% coverage. And what we see there is that they used the quadrivalent vaccine. The genital warts disappeared from the population that was vaccinated, from young Australians, girls and boys. Boys initially by herd immunity, that is an effect of a widespread vaccination of girls, but now also boys are vaccinated there. So genital warts disappeared, and very recently they looked at juvenile recurrent papillomatosis that is induced by low-risk HPV types 6 mainly and 11. And what they see is that the still occurring cases are in children born to mothers who have not been vaccinated, but there are no cases in children to mothers who have been vaccinated. Very big success for a devastating disease, and is showing that, vaccination will not only prevent cervical disease, but also other HPV-related diseases. And then concomitantly with that is a reduction of CRN2, like we have seen in Scotland. So how does this then relate to screening? What Australians are discussing is that once in a lifetime screen or 2 screens at the age of 30 and 45 would be enough to rescue women who have other types than the vaccine types responsible for their disease. This might even not be cost effective, but it's an ethical thing that we have to do, of course. And we talk about elimination of the vaccine genotypes, something that we could not have imagined before we started. Now, this is a quote, and the quote is my own quote. I would like to see this happen in my lifetime to eliminate cervical cancer, and my colleagues in the field also think like that. So we have thought about means to accelerate the effect of HPV elimination and cervical cancer elimination. And this study looked at vaccination of women older than the recommended age, 9 to 18 years, in some countries 26 years. Here, women between the age of 24 and 45 are vaccinated, and they looked at the effect of this vaccination to prevent disease in these women. And as you can see, the efficacy is quite high. 100% in genital warts and 80 to 90% in other HPV-related disease. So there would be an argument to vaccinate a broader age range, the HPV Faster initiative. How would this look? Like HPV positive women, first of all, we have the vaccination of the younger population, but then we would start vaccination also of those who are at higher age, and all the blue ones are HPV negative, the red ones are HPV positive. They get vaccine altogether, they get an HPV screen. But there is a caveat, of course, the vaccine is too expensive to cover the whole population right now. So maybe we get a cheaper vaccine soon, then we could think about putting it into life, this strategy. The other thing is that also the HPV test is quite expensive. It's not simple to perform, so you need a lot of effort to do that. But in combination, what we just heard from Murat, the screening trial or the screening initiative they have in Turkey, combined with vaccination, would lead into this direction. So then, if we have vaccinated all these women, we have a very high efficacy of more than 90% to expect. One woman would have a non-preventable HPV type that leads to disease. So here also some screening has to be done once in a lifetime probably. Those who are HPV positive at the time of vaccination have to be found by HPV testing and have to be followed up. Some clear spontaneously, some get treatment. And if there is a screen and treat protocol, then we are not very certain how well these women are protected from invasive disease. But this is something that could improve the effect of vaccination and screening very rapidly. But another caveat is this is designed for the developed world again, because there the HPV prevalence is rather low, so you have a high efficacy of the vaccination at higher age. It's different in Oceania and in Africa. If you look at Africa in particular, we have a prevalence rate even at this vaccination ages of around 20%. In a study we have performed in Ghana, the accessing trial, we screened 2,000 women with an age range that could be vaccinated. For this study, we have a prevalence of 32% high-risk HPV positives. So we would need an intensified screening there, of course, but also HPV testing would not be a good screening tool with 1/3 of the women testing positive. So what do we have for screening options? There is visual inspection. That is something that has been promoted by the WHO for a long time, and still is, because it's a very cheap method. However, it produces a lot of false positives, and all these studies that are running with VIA now struggle with this problem, that these false positives get over-treatment. And until now, we didn't see any real reduction in mortality by VIA. Cytology has done its job in the Northern Hemisphere and the Western world, certainly, with a lot of effort. It's something we cannot introduce and build up in the developing world, and so we need different methods. Maybe use it as a triage system, but it's just too difficult to implement in Africa. And then there's HPV testing again. This test has a very high sensitivity, but the specificity is low. As you just have seen, 1/3 of the women testing positive. This is not a valuable screening approach, because you have to triage all these positive women later. Good is a high negative predictive value, so you can exclude women from further screenings if they are HPV negative for a while. So what we need then is a lot of triage, colposcopy, biopsy, histology. We just heard in Turkey the colposcopy is a problem. The service is not sufficient. So what we think now is adding molecular tests to the screening is important, is the next step, and the whole field is moving into this direction from pure HPV testing to biomarker testing. Just a short compilation. There are protein assays now available detecting the oncoproteins of the virus, and these are critical. The expression of the oncogenes is critical for transforming a cell. So this is a good biomarker to looking at transformed cells. Then there is methylation markers that have been identified, microRNAs, and this is something that we are working on, as a test that looks at several biomarkers, cellular biomarkers, that are upregulated by or during progression to disease. So then we would not just detect HPV infection, but disease. I have to skip on a bit. This is just a representation of what methylation markers are. This is a chemical modification of the DNA that alters gene expression, and some switching off of genes is very important for progression to transform cells into cervical cancer. And this can now be detected. Another thing is the oncoprotein detection. There are 2 assays now available on the market, one for X6, one for E7. And these tests have the advantage that they find cells that are already on the way to cancer development. Just a representation of this test by Arbovita that we have used in Africa in our study. And this test, like a pregnancy test, similar, in a lateral flow method, detects the oncoprotein of E16 and HPV 16 and 18 with the black line. So this one would be positive. And it has a very high specificity, basically, to detect the healthy persons. Positive predictive value is pretty high, and for SIN3, 53% are detected. I skip this now because it's important just to see that if you test positive women, HPV positive women, or you test them positive with the E6 or negative with the E6, there's a difference in the disease that will develop over the next year. Women who have been tested HPV positive but E6 negative, only 1.8% would progress to SIN2 and 0.5% to SIN3, while those who have been tested positive with the E6 test, 10 times more would progress to SIN2 and 15 times more to SIN3. So this is an important information you get. This is a lesion that has a potential to progress further to higher disease grades. Again, I would like to skip this here, show you last impression on what we have developed. It would be very nice to dissect the different stages of disease, especially if you don't have access to pathology. What we have done, we have designed and identified biomarker sets that are expressed specifically in these different stages of disease progression. We do a molecular test, and what we see is that certain markers come up with the progression to the next stage. And this neo-expression of the markers is a very important information that we get. And also the expression strength is important, because you can imagine more transformed cells or more cells of transformed cells will give you a stronger signal. What we get is, with the combination of the HPV oncogene expression in this test, cellular proliferation markers, tumor stem cell markers, and tumor markers, the neo-expression of these markers and the increased expression of these markers, an accuracy to detect CIN3. This is not HPV positive and there is some disease, but this is definite detection of SIN3 of 90%. So the accuracy is 90%, and if you use this as a screening test, we can really have a pretty good focus of the resources to those women who really need it. I now call it molecular profiling histology, because it, especially for low-income countries, helps us to substantiate or maybe replace pathology. In conclusion, I wanted to show you that vaccination is the true prevention that we can do now. It works very well. It's very safe, it's efficacious, and it has a lasting effect, because women who had been vaccinated 10 years ago still are protected and do not develop disease, so there's no need for boosting. The tool is available, we just have to use it, and we have to introduce it in these areas where it's most necessary to introduce in the low-income countries. HPV testing should be very specific for a disease, for high-grade lesions, because, again, in low-income countries, the resources are so limited that we have to focus on the women who really need it. What I didn't discuss is the problem in HIV prevalent areas, where HPV testing is again compromised by a high positive rate for HPV. So HPV-based screening is very difficult to do there. There are new systems being developed that will solve some of our problems, certainly. What I also didn't discuss is that these systems should be self-sampling compatible. What we see in low-income countries or in countries with very like conservative social structures, that women are not very willing to expose themselves to doctors, but self-sampling is highly acceptable to them. So I thank you for your attention, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kaufmann, for this interesting talk. In the interest of time, we might have one question. Yes, please.
Has anything been done looking at vaccination shortly after birth?
In Turkey, my country.
Well, globally.
After birth. Nothing yet. As far as in the vaccination, the current update is probably a SCUTO study done by LCI of USA, which is single dose. single dose, prospective randomized. We have real-world data showing that single dose vaccination works very well. But we don't have data in the neonates.
No, the problem is that the vaccines are only approved as of the age of 9. And the studies are missing to showing that they are also, they will be immunogenic, they will be effective, but we need the studies, we need the evidence to recommend it at a lower age range. I would like to see it at 6 or just
Me
after
too.
birth. It would be really good. What we have done in a off-label use study in patients with respiratory papillomatosis, young children at 3-6 years of age, we vaccinated them with Gardasil, and we saw an effect in the young population. Very few cases, but we saw an effect, and it's well tolerated, of course, and no problem. What I have heard is that India is now, the Serum Institute of India is producing their own vaccine. They are breaking the patent, that's good. They do it at a very low cost. They do more types, and they want to start a study in 6-year-olds. So to bring it to earlier use. And bring it out of this insane thing of it has something to do with sexuality. Vaccination has nothing to do with sexuality. Yeah.
So again, excellence, and I think it's a very important, and we just decided to make next Charite-Mayo conference a Global Women Cancer Health Forum to discuss much more. Only one practical question at the end. So you showed the triage, wonderful.
Yeah.
But there are some regions all over the world, they have no doctors.
Yeah.
And so non-doctors doing the HPV testing. So two questions is, what's about self-testing or self-sampling? And second is, how to train the midwives and all the others that not everything is cancer when they see, not to over-treat the patients with biopsies.
Yeah.
Is there any additional strategies for this?
Well, self-test, it can be, we have a lot of published data, including the Cochrane reviews. All PCR methodologies, molecular HPV tests can be used safely as a self-test. But of course, as
self-sampling.
Self-sampling.
Not self-testing,
Yeah.
self-sampling.
But as you already mentioned, we should not leave HPV alone. I mean, all the ladies then will do self-sampling, and then they will be in shock. Oh, I am HPV positive. Where did I get it? Where should I go? They look their husband sometimes, you know, did you bring it to me or something? So I prefer also triage tests included in the self-sampling, so that not all ladies are referred there. But if you have 5% positivity with this inclusion of this triage in the self-tests, I think it should be less than 5%. So I prefer self-testing, self-sampling with inclusion of triage tests. Regarding the midwives, it's very important. When we first time started our project, it was our main crisis. That the ladies were, you know, were not well informed, and they were just, I will become cancer, high risk oncogenic HPV 16. But within time, on TVs, medias, smart cell programs, on a Ministry of Health web page, so within time this crisis, you know, slows, and people understand that it's a transient infection, 60 to 70% resolve spontaneously.
Yeah. Well, we just have submitted a paper, the Greco self-study, where we, together with colleagues in Greece, of course, have self-sampled 12,000 women in rural areas by the midwives, and we found exactly the 1,000 women we expected, 8% HPV positives. They went to colposcopy then, and we could find the disease then there well triaged, but by colposcopy. Wow. Yeah, so this is something you could do in Greece, but probably not in Ghana.
In Ghana,
so,
yeah.
Thank you very much for showing us as well that it's not just about targeted therapy.